Watch closely, my dear. Over, then under, like this.
Like this, Mama?
Yes, that's it. You're doing so well.
It's hard, but I like it.
Good girl.
I promise to love you, Junho,
And I promise to love and cherish you, Adobe,
forever.
forever.
One month, I promise.
The crystal chandelier exploded above her head before she even understood what was happening. Glass rained down like frozen tears across the marble floor of the Hatchwang estate, and in that single suspended second, Ahuoma Adichie threw her thin body over the trembling boy beside her, shielding him with arms that had never been taught how to protect anyone. She felt the sting of 100 small cuts open across her back. She felt the boy's heartbeat slamming against her ribs, and she heard him whisper 7 words into the curve of her neck that she would carry for the rest of her life. "Don't let them find me, please." She was 11 years old. He was 9. Neither of them knew that the men who had just kicked down the gates of the Eastern Wing were not robbers. They were paid assassins. And the boy beneath her was not a guest in that mansion. He was the only son of the most powerful man in Seoul. By the time the bodyguards burst through the smoke and dragged the killers away in cuffs, Ahuoma had pressed her small hand so tightly over the boy's mouth that his lips were bruised. She did not let go even when the housekeeper screamed her name. She did not let go even when the boy's mother fainted at the sight of the blood pooling beneath her bare feet. She only let go when the boy himself, Hong Di-won, lifted one trembling finger and traced the shape of a single tear on her cheek and said, in a voice too soft for any adult to hear, "I will find you again, no matter how long it takes. I swear it on my breath." 23 years later, on a Tuesday morning in autumn, Ahuoma Adichie knelt scrubbing the same marble floor in the same eastern wing of the same Huang estate, and she had no idea that the man whose private quarters she was about to enter was the very boy whose life she had once saved. She had no idea that he had been searching for her, in secret, for more than 2 decades. And she had no idea that in exactly 14 days, 250 of the most beautiful Afro-Korean princesses from Korda, every aristocratic bloodline between Lagos and Busan, would be summoned to that very mansion to compete for his hand in marriage, while the only woman he truly desired would be the one carrying their tea trays in plain cotton uniforms. If a story is going to grip your heart and not let go for the next 60 minutes, you owe it to yourself to do one small thing right now. Tap that subscribe button, hit the like, drop the word loyalty in the comments, so we know you're with us from the very beginning. Because what you are about to witness is not just a story. It is a reckoning. It is a promise made by a frightened boy that becomes the storm that shakes an empire. Stay close, stay quiet, and let the truth unfold. Now, to understand how a maid named Ahuoma ended up scrubbing the floors of the man who had once whispered a vow into her neck, you have to travel back. Back before the chandelier. Back before the assassins. Back to a small, dusty compound on the outskirts of Enugu, where a Nigerian woman named Adiabai Adichie was teaching her firstborn daughter how to weave palm fronds into baskets. Adiabai had married a Korean engineer named Park Junho when she was 22 years old, in a quiet ceremony beneath a mango tree, with only her grandmother and 2 goats as witnesses. Junho had come to Nigeria to build bridges. He had stayed because he had found a different kind of bridge, one made of a woman's laughter and the smell of jollof rice on Sunday afternoons. Their daughter Ahuoma was born during the rainy season, and Adiabai swore that the heavens cried for joy the night her child arrived. The girl had her mother's wide brown eyes and her father's long, narrow nose, and a quiet, watchful stillness that made every elder in the village whisper that this was an old soul returned to walk the earth again. But Junho's family in Seoul had never approved of the marriage. They were old money. They were proud. They were cruel in the polished, smiling way that only people raised in marble houses can be cruel. When Ahuoma was 9 years old, a black car arrived at the compound carrying 2 of Junho's brothers and a thick envelope of documents. They told him his father was dying. They told him he was needed in Seoul to sign the inheritance papers. They told him his wife and child could come later, once the funeral arrangements were settled. Junho kissed Adiabai on the forehead. He lifted Ahuoma into the air and spun her until she shrieked with laughter. He promised he would send for them in 1 month. He never came back. 3 weeks later, Adiabai received a letter saying her husband had died in a car accident on the road from Busan. The letter included a check for a small amount of money and a single line that read, in cold, careful Korean handwriting, "The Park family considers the matter concluded." Ahuoma did not cry in front of her daughter. She did not cry in front of the village. She only cried alone, at night, into the pillow that still carried the scent of her husband's cologne, until one morning she woke up, and the crying was over, and something in her had hardened into iron. She sold the goats. She sold the small piece of land Junho had bought in her name. She used the money to buy 2 plane tickets to Seoul. She did not tell anyone she was going. She did not tell anyone why. She only told Ahuoma, on the long flight across the world, that they were going to find out the truth, and that no matter what they discovered, they would face it together. They arrived in Seoul in the dead of winter, and the cold was so violent it felt like punishment. They had no relatives. They had no friends. They had a few $100s and a photograph of Junho standing in front of his family's mansion, smiling, with his hand on the gate. Ahuoma found work as a kitchen helper in a restaurant in Itaewon, and within 3 months, she had taught herself enough Korean to ask sharp, dangerous questions. She learned that Junho had not died in a car accident. She learned that his older brother, a man named Park Di-yoon, had inherited everything. She learned that her marriage certificate, which she carried folded inside her bra, was the only legal document in the world that could threaten Di-yoon's grip on the Park family fortune. She did not go to the police. She did not go to a lawyer. She was a foreign woman with a child, and no money in a country that did not yet know how to see her. Instead, she did something braver. She walked, on a snowy morning, to the front gate of the Park mansion, and she rang the bell. And when the housekeeper opened the door, she said, in clear, careful Korean, "My name is Ahuoma Adichie Park. This is my daughter, Ahuoma. We have come home." The door was slammed in her face. But the housekeeper, a tiny woman with silver hair named Madame Sunya, had seen the child, and Madame Sunya had a long memory and a tender heart. That night, she could not sleep. The next morning she walked across the city to the kitchen in Itaewon where Ahuoma worked, and she sat down at the counter and ordered a bowl of soup, and she said quietly, without looking up, "I cannot help you fight them, but I can give your daughter a roof. The Huang family next door is hiring. They are kind people. Their son needs a playmate. The wife has been ill. If you bring your daughter to me tomorrow, I will speak for her." Ahuoma wept right there at the counter. Not from gratitude, from rage, from the unbearable understanding that the only way to keep her child safe in this country was to send her, every morning, to scrub the floors of strangers, while she herself washed dishes for the equivalent of $3 an hour. But she did it, because that is what mothers do. And so Ahuoma, at the age of 10, began walking each morning to the back gate of the Huang estate. The Huangs were not the Parks. They had no quarrel with Ahuoma. They knew nothing of her story. To them, she was simply a kitchen woman's clever daughter who could fold napkins, polish silverware, and keep their lonely little boy company during the long afternoons when his mother was too tired to leave her bed. The boy's name was Diwon. He was 9 years old, small for his age, with thick black hair that fell into his eyes and a stutter that came out only when he was nervous. He was the heir to the Hwang Group, a conglomerate that owned shipping lines, hospitals, and half of the steel produced in the southern provinces. He was lonely in the particular way that only very rich children can be lonely, surrounded by tutors and guards, and no one who wanted anything from him except his name. The first day Ahuoma walked into the playroom, Diwon was sitting on the floor pretending to read a book upside down. He looked up at her and his cheeks went red, and he said, "Why you smell like rain." She did not laugh. She sat down across from him and turned the book the right way and said, "That is because we walked in the rain to get here. My mother says rain is a kind of blessing because it makes everything new." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he smiled. And from that day forward, for the next year of their lives, those two children were inseparable. They built forts out of silk cushions in the library. They stole pieces of chocolate from the pantry and ate them under the grand piano in the music room. She taught him 3 Igbo words. He taught her how to write his name in Hangul. She told him about mango trees and goats. He told her about his mother's slow, sad disappearing. And then, one warm spring evening when Ahuoma was 11 and Diwon was 9, the men with guns came. The Huang patriarch had recently exposed a corruption ring inside his own board of directors. 3 executives faced prison. One of them, a man with debts to dangerous people, had decided that the simplest way to end the investigation was to send a message that could not be ignored. He hired men to kidnap the boy, not to kill him, only to break him, and through him, to break the father. But something went wrong. The men were drunk on cheap soju and rage. They burst into the eastern wing while Diwan was practicing piano and Ahuoma was dusting the shelves nearby. The first gunshot shattered the chandelier. The second was meant for Diwan's head. Ahuoma did not think. She did not calculate. She did not even feel afraid. She simply moved, the way a body moves when the soul has decided something the mind does not yet understand. She crossed the room in 3 strides. She tackled Diwan to the floor. She covered him with her own body. And when the assassins kicked open the door, they saw only a small, dark child sprawled across a small, pale child, and for one single critical second they hesitated, because they had been told there was only one boy in the room, and they did not understand which one to grab first. That second was enough. The bodyguards arrived. The shots went wild. One assassin was killed on the spot. The other was tackled and beaten until his bones broke. And in the smoke and the screaming, Ahuoma whispered into Diwan's ear, "Breathe slowly. Breathe like the rain falling. I am here. I am here." When the dust settled, the Hahwang patriarch himself came running into the room. He was a tall, hard, weeping man, and he scooped his son into his arms and rocked him like an infant. But before he turned to leave, he looked down at the small, dark girl who was bleeding from 100 cuts on her back, and he said, in a voice that shook with something deeper than gratitude, "Whatever you want, child, for the rest of your life, it is yours." Ahuoma, still trembling, only whispered, "I want my mother." So a car was sent. Adeabai was found at the restaurant in Itiwen. She was driven to the mansion. She held her daughter all night in the hospital room, while the doctors stitched her back together. And just before sunrise, while Ahuoma slept with bandages wrapped around her shoulders, little Diwan Huang slipped past the nurses and climbed onto the edge of the bed and kissed Ahuoma's forehead and whispered into her hair, "I will find you again, no matter how long it takes. I swear it on my breath." And then everything changed. The Huang patriarch, terrified that the conspirators still at large might come for the boy again, made a decision that he believed was wise. He sent Diwan abroad. Within a week, the boy was on a plane to Switzerland, then to England, then to America, moved from school to school under a different name, hidden inside layers of money and silence. Letters were intercepted. Phone calls were impossible. The patriarch told his son it was only for a season. It became a decade. And meanwhile, Adeabai Adichie, having seen the price of trying to claim a Korean inheritance, made a quiet, painful decision of her own. She would not poison her daughter's life with the war she had come to fight. She let the Parks keep their fortune. She tore up the marriage certificate and burned it in a small clay pot on the balcony of the tiny apartment they could now afford with the Huang patriarch's generous gift. She took the gift money and used it to open a small flower shop in a quiet neighborhood. She raised her daughter on jollof rice and kimchi, on Igbo proverbs and Korean folktales, on the simple, unshakable belief that goodness, even when invisible, is its own reward. She never told Ahuoma the truth about her father's family. She never told her about the Parks. She wanted her child to grow up free of that poison. And Ahuoma, who carried the scars on her back like a private map of the night she had saved a boy she would never see again, slowly let the memory fade into something soft and strange, like a dream half-remembered. By the time she was 20, she had stopped thinking of Diwan at all. By the time she was 25, her mother was dying. Adeabai's cancer was quiet and quick, the way some cancers are when they have grown unnoticed, inside a body that has done too much hard work for too many years. The flower shop closed. The medical bills piled. Ahuoma sold everything they had. She slept on the floor of the hospital. She held her mother's hand for 3 days and 3 nights, and when Adeabai died, she died smiling, because she said she had seen Junho waiting for her in a field of yellow flowers. After the funeral, Ahuoma found herself standing alone in an empty apartment with a stack of unpaid bills and the cold, clear understanding that she had nowhere left to go. She walked across Seoul for 2 days looking for work. She had a small college degree in literature that no one cared about. She had a quiet voice and a steady gaze that made hiring managers uncomfortable. And then, on the 3rd day, she walked past a familiar gate, and she stopped. She had not been to the Hakwang estate in 14 years, but she remembered the gardens. She remembered the lemon tree by the south wall. She remembered Madame Sunya's silver hair and tender voice. She rang the bell. The intercom crackled. A voice she did not recognize asked her business. She said, "My name is Ahuoma Adichie. I am looking for work. I do not need much. I am a hard worker, and I once knew this house, a very long time ago." There was a long silence. Then the gate clicked open, and when she stepped inside, an old woman with silver hair came shuffling down the gravel path with tears already running down her cheeks, and she folded Ahuoma into her arms and whispered, "Child! Oh, child!" You came back. Madame Sunya was now the head housekeeper. The old patriarch had died 8 years earlier. The Huang group was now run by his son, Diwan, who had returned from abroad at the age of 26 and turned a sleepy traditional empire into a global force. Diwan was now 32. He was unmarried. He was, according to the magazines that Ahuoma did not read, the most eligible bachelor in Northeast Asia. And he was, at that very moment, in Tokyo for a series of meetings, scheduled to return in 7 days. Madame Sunya did not tell Ahuoma any of this. She only said, "We have an opening in the household staff. The pay is fair. The room is small but warm. The young master does not like a fuss. Keep your head down. Do your work, and whatever you do, child, do not tell anyone your name." Ahuoma did not understand the last instruction, but she nodded. And so, 2 days later, she put on a plain gray uniform and tied back her braids and walked into the eastern wing of the Huang estate, and she began scrubbing the same floor where, 23 years earlier, she had once thrown her body across a frightened boy and saved his life. For 3 months, nothing happened. She worked. She kept her head down, as Madame Sunya had told her. She ate her meals in the staff kitchen. She slept in a small, clean room above the garage. She made one friend, a young maid named Borum, who was loud and funny and constantly in trouble for stealing pastries from the patisserie deliveries. Ahuoma did not seek anyone's attention. She did not ask questions about the family. She simply did her work with the quiet precision of a woman who had learned, very early, that survival is a thing you build with your hands, one task at a time. And then, on a Thursday afternoon in late autumn, the young master came home. Ahuoma was on her knees in the great hall when she heard the front gates open. She heard the engines of 3 black cars. She heard the click of expensive shoes on marble. She did not look up. She had been trained not to look up. She heard a man's voice, low and tired, saying something to one of the security officers. She heard Madame Sunya greet him with the kind of gentle scolding that grandmothers use on grown men. She heard him laugh, a short, dry, surprised laugh, as if laughter were a thing he had forgotten how to do. And then she heard footsteps walk past her, and stop, and turn back, and stop again. There was a long silence. She kept her eyes fixed on the marble. She could see the tips of his black leather shoes. She could see the cuff of his charcoal trousers. She could see the shadow he cast across her bucket of soapy water. He did not speak. She did not breathe. And then, very softly, he said, "What is your name?" Ahuoma raised her head only slightly. She did not look at his face. She looked at his hands, which were long and pale and clasped in front of him, as if he were holding something invisible and precious. She said, "Ahuoma, sir." There was another silence, longer this time. She could feel him looking at her. She could feel him reading her face the way a man reads a letter that has arrived 20 years too late. And then, in a voice that had gone strange and tight, he said, "Ahuoma what?" And before she could answer, Madame Sunya came hurrying down the hall with a tray of tea. And she said brightly, too brightly, "Young master, your meeting begins in 10 minutes. The chairman of Sunchan is already in the library." Diwan did not move for another full second. Then he turned and walked away. Ahuoma's hands were trembling so violently she could not pick up her brush. She did not know why. That night, in the small, clean room above the garage, she lay awake staring at the ceiling. She told herself she was being foolish. He was a stranger, a rich man, a boss. The way he had looked at her meant nothing. The way her heart had pounded meant nothing. The way her back, beneath the old scars, had suddenly begun to ache, the way a body sometimes aches when it remembers a thing the mind has forgotten, meant nothing. She slept badly. The next morning, when she came down to begin her work, she was told her assignment had changed. She would no longer be cleaning the great hall. She would be assigned, by direct order of the young master, to the personal service of his study. She would bring his tea in the mornings. She would dust his bookshelves in the afternoons. She would be the only member of the household staff permitted to enter that room. Borum, when she heard the news, gasped and grabbed Ahuoma's hands and said, "Do you have any idea how many girls in this house would commit a small crime to get that position? You must have a guardian angel, Ahuoma, or you must be extremely lucky, or you must have done something to him that he has not told anyone about." Ahuoma laughed weakly and said she had done nothing, but she did not believe her own words. She walked to the study with a tray of tea. She knocked. He told her to enter. The room was vast and lined with books and smelled of old paper and cold winter sunlight. He was sitting behind a desk that looked older than the country. He did not look up. He said, "Set it on the side table, that is all." She did. She left. She closed the door behind her, and she stood in the hallway for a long time, pressing her hand against her chest, as if trying to hold her heart in place. For the next 10 days, this was the pattern. She brought him tea. He did not look at her. He never spoke beyond instructions, but she began to notice small things. She noticed that the bookshelves of his study contained, hidden among the leather-bound volumes of philosophy and economics, 3 small books in Igbo, the language of her mother. She noticed that on his desk, beneath a glass paperweight, was a single faded photograph of a Nigerian flower seller standing in front of a small shop in Seoul. She noticed that on the corner of his bookshelf, behind a row of books, was a small wooden box. And on the 11th day, when she dusted the shelves while he was away in Hong Kong, the box fell. The lid sprang open, and inside she found a piece of fabric. It was a small torn piece of gray cotton, stained with old dried blood. And it was, she realized as her heart stopped beating, a piece of the dress she had been wearing the night the chandelier exploded. She did not put it back. She did not breathe. She stared at the cloth for what felt like an hour. And then, with hands shaking so violently she could barely close her fingers, she returned the cloth to the box, and the box to its hiding place. And she walked out of the study and down the hallway and into the staff kitchen, where she sat down at the long wooden table and quietly, without making any sound, began to weep. Madame Sunya found her there an hour later. The old woman did not ask what had happened. She only sat down beside her and took her hand and said, "He has been searching for you, child. Since the day he came back from America, he has been searching for you in every flower shop in this city. He did not know your mother had died. He did not know you had taken her family name. He found you finally, 3 months ago, through a record at the hospital. He arranged for the position to open. He arranged for me to bring you in. He has been waiting, Ahuoma. He has been waiting all his life." Ahuoma stared at the old woman through her tears and whispered, "Why did he not tell me?" And Madame Sunya smiled the kind of sad smile that only old women who have watched the world break and mend itself many times can smile. And she said, "Because he is afraid, child. Because he is the most powerful man in this country, and he does not know how to say to a woman, after 23 years, that he has not forgotten the sound of her voice. So he hopes you will see him first. He hopes you will know him. He hopes you will come to him on your own." Ahuoma did not go to him that night. She did not know what to do. She did not know what she felt. She did not know if what she felt was love, or pity, or fear, or something stranger that did not yet have a name. And before she could decide, the world tilted again because the next morning an announcement appeared in every newspaper in Korea and across half the continent of Africa. The Hwang Group, on behalf of its chairman Diwan Hwang, would be hosting a gala unlike any the country had seen in a generation. 250 Afro-Korean princesses, daughters of mixed heritage aristocratic families from Lagos to Busan, from Accra to Daegu, from Nairobi to Incheon, would be formally invited to a royal ball at the Hwang estate. Over the course of 7 nights, the young chairman would meet each of them, dine with each of them, dance with each of them. At the end of the 7 nights, he would choose one. He would announce his engagement. The world had been waiting for him to marry. The world would now watch him choose. Now, before we go any further, before the carriages arrive and the music begins and the candles are lit, let us pause for one breath. Because if you are still here, if you are still listening, if your heart has not yet been pulled into the room with these 2 people who have spent 23 years walking toward each other without knowing it, then you and I have something in common. We both understand that the best stories are not about kings and queens. They are about the small moments when a child throws her body across another child and decides without being asked that some lives are worth saving. So if this story has reached you, do me one small kindness. Tap that subscribe button if you have not already. Tap the bell so you do not miss the next one. And in the comments, tell me one thing. Tell me the name of the person who, when you were a child, made you feel safe in a room full of strangers. Tell me their name, and we will all read it together. And we will all remember that some kinds of love do not need permission to begin. Now, the ball. The invitations went out by hand-delivered courier, each one printed on cream paper edged in real gold leaf, each one carrying a small wax seal in the shape of the Hwang family crest. The princesses began arriving in Seoul 3 days before the first night. They came from old colonial families in Cape Coast. They came from diplomatic dynasties in Pyongyang. They came from oil families in Port Harcourt and banking families in Daegu and royal lineages in Yoruboland that traced themselves back to the courts of Oyo. They were dressed in gowns that had been sewn for them by designers in Milan and Lagos and Paris. They were trained in 8 languages. They were spoken of in the gossip columns as the most beautiful gathering of young women the modern world had ever assembled in one place. And at the center of all of them, on the first night, would stand Diwan Huang, in a black tuxedo, with a single white camellia pinned to his lapel, ready to begin a process that, on the surface, was a courtship, but in his own private heart was something else entirely. Ahuoma did not understand. She had asked Madame Sunya, in tears, the night the announcement was made. If he has been searching for me, why is he doing this? Why is he choosing a wife from 250 other women? Why is he humiliating me? And Madame Sunya, with that same sad smile, had said only, "Watch, child, watch and listen. The young master does nothing without a reason, and the reason, when you understand it, will break your heart and mend it at the same time." On the first night of the ball, Ahuoma was assigned, along with 30 other maids, to serve refreshments in the great hall. She wore her gray uniform. She tied back her braids. She kept her head down. The princesses arrived in a river of color. The chandelier, the same chandelier that had once exploded above her head, now restored and triple reinforced, sparkled like a frozen waterfall. The orchestra began to play. Diwan stood at the top of the grand staircase, and when he descended, the room fell silent. He was beautiful in the way that grief sometimes makes a man beautiful, his face thinner than the magazines had captured, his eyes darker, his bearing very still. He greeted his guests one by one. He bowed. He kissed gloved hands. He moved through the room like a man performing a duty he did not believe in. And Ahuoma, carrying a silver tray of champagne flutes, watched him from the edge of the room, and she felt her own heart do a strange, small thing. She felt jealousy. She felt foolishness. She felt the absurd, undeniable, unbearable understanding that she did not want him to choose any of these women. The first princess to dance with him was a young woman named Yeben. Her mother was a former finance minister of Ghana. Her father owned half the shipping ports in Incheon. Yeben herself was a graduate of 3 universities, a violinist of professional caliber, and a woman whose face had been on the cover of a magazine in every country between London and Tokyo. She was 26 years old. She was, according to every measurable standard the world had ever invented, the most desirable woman in the room. She was also, Ahuoma realized within 10 minutes, watching her, the most dangerous. There was something in the way Yeben smiled, something in the way her eyes moved across the staff like she was counting livestock, something in the way she laughed at Diwan's quiet, distracted jokes, as if she had already decided the joke was funny before he had told it. When Diwan led her in the first dance, Yeben pressed her body slightly closer than was customary. When the dance ended, she did not let go of his hand, and when she walked past Ahuoma, on her way back to her seat, she looked Ahuoma directly in the face, and she smiled, and the smile was so cold and so precise that Ahuoma understood, in that 1 second, that this woman had already seen her, that this woman had already understood something, and that this woman had already decided to destroy her. That night, after the ball ended, after the princesses had been escorted to their suites, and the orchestra had packed away its instruments, and the candles had been snuffed, Ahuoma was wiping down the long buffet table when she heard the click of heels behind her. She turned. Yeben was standing in the doorway of the great hall. She was alone. Her hair was loose now, falling in dark waves over her shoulders. She had taken off her gloves. She walked into the room slowly, the way a cat walks into a room it intends to own, and she stopped 3 feet from Ahuoma and said, in perfect, lilting English, "You are the maid, the one he watches." Ahuoma did not answer. Yeben smiled. "Oh, do not pretend. Everyone has noticed. The way he turns his head when you walk past, the way his eyes find you in a crowded room, the way he forgets, for half a second, to perform his role. I have been studying him for 6 hours. I have studied many men. I know what I am seeing." Ahuoma said very quietly, "I am only the maid, madam. I do not understand what you mean." Yeben took 1 step closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Let me tell you a story, little maid. There was once a Nigerian woman who married a Korean man. The Korean man's family did not approve. They killed him. They cast out his widow. The widow died. Her daughter is now scrubbing floors in this very house, completely unaware that she is the legitimate heir to a Korean fortune larger than the Hwang Group itself. Does any of that sound familiar? Ahuoma's hands began to tremble. Yebin smiled wider. I thought so. You see, little maid, my own grandmother was the housekeeper for the Park family for 40 years. She knows the secret. She told me, on her deathbed, 3 years ago. I have been waiting for you for a long time. I have been waiting to find out where Adebayo daughter ended up. And then, 6 months ago, I heard a rumor, a whisper, that the young chairman Hwang was searching for a Nigerian flower seller's child. So I made my way to this ball. I bought my invitation with my mother's name, and here you are, right where I knew you would be. Ahuoma whispered, What do you want from me? Yebin's smile did not move. I want you to disappear. Tomorrow morning, you will pack your small bag, and you will leave this estate, and you will never come back. If you do not, I will go to the Park family. I will tell them where you are. They will not be kind. Little maid, they have spent 23 years pretending you do not exist. The moment they know you do, they will make sure you stop existing. And as for your young chairman, he will marry me. Because I will tell him, in 7 days, when he is supposed to choose his bride, that I have evidence that the maid he has been searching for has been working for the Park family all along as a spy. I will produce documents. I will produce witnesses. I will break his heart so completely that the only safe place left for him to put it will be in my hands. Ahuoma stared at her. She tried to speak. No words came. Yebin reached out and touched her cheek, very gently, the way a hunter touches the neck of a wounded deer. You have until tomorrow morning, little maid. Make the right choice. You are clearly not stupid. You know what kind of world this is. Ahuoma did not sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed in the small room above the garage, and she stared out the window at the moon, and she tried to think clearly. She did not know what to believe. She did not know if Yebin was telling the truth about the Park family, about her father, about the fortune. She did not know if any of it mattered. She only knew that the woman who had whispered to her in the great hall had eyes that had seen too many people erased. She knew that whatever Yebin said she could do, she could do. And she knew, with a terrible clarity, that the only way to protect D1 from being broken by lies was to leave. Because if she stayed, even if she said nothing, Yebin would weave the lies anyway, and the lies would do their work. Better to vanish quietly. Better to spare him the cruelty. Better to take the small, secret knowledge of having been remembered, of having been searched for, of having mattered to one good man for 23 years, and carry it like a candle into whatever the rest of her life would be. At dawn, she packed her small bag. She wrote a single note. It said only, in careful Korean, "Thank you for the kindness of your house. I have to go. Please do not look for me. Live well. Ahuoma." She left the note on the kitchen table where Madame Sunya would find it. She walked down the gravel path. She passed through the side gate. She did not look back. She had $200 in her pocket, and the clothes on her back, and a piece of stale bread Borum had given her 3 days earlier without knowing it would become the only food she would eat for the next 2 days. She walked to the bus station. She bought a ticket to a small town in the south that she had never been to and could barely pronounce. She got on the bus. She watched Seoul disappear through the dirty window. She did not cry. She had used up all her tears, she thought, on her mother. She did not know that the second part of her life was just beginning, and that the man she was running away from was, at that very moment, 3 hours into a private investigation that would, within 48 hours, find her again. Now hold on, right here, because if your heart is breaking the way mine is breaking, if you are sitting there with your hand pressed over your mouth, wondering how a woman could be that brave and that broken at the same time, then take 1 second and let me know. Drop a heart in the comments. Just one heart. So I know you are still with me. So I know we are walking this last hour together. And while you are there, share this video with one person. Just one. Maybe your sister. Maybe your best friend. Maybe a stranger who looks like they need a story today. Because stories like this one are how we remember. In a hard world, that good people are still out there, finding their way back to each other. Now, let us go. Because this story is not over. In fact, the part you have been waiting for is just about to begin. D1 Hwang received the news of Ahuoma's disappearance at 6 in the morning. Madame Sunya, weeping, brought the note to his bedroom door. He read it 3 times. He did not weep. He did not shout. He sat down on the edge of his bed in his silk pajamas, and he stared at the floor for a very long time. Then he stood up. He dressed in a plain gray suit. He went to his study. He picked up the phone. He called a man named Yoon Junho, who had been his personal investigator for 11 years. He said only, "She is gone. I need her found. Pull every favor we have. I want to know where she boarded a bus or a train or a flight in the last 6 hours. I want to know her destination. I do not want her stopped. I do not want her approached. I only want to know where she is. And I want to know everything about a woman named B. Yeben, every detail, every secret, every transaction her family has made in the last 10 years. I want it all on my desk by tomorrow morning." He hung up. He sat back down. And for the first time in his adult life, Diwan Huang allowed himself to feel afraid. He did not understand, yet, what had happened. He did not yet know about Yeben's threats. He only knew that the woman who had thrown her body across his at the age of 11, the woman whose voice had been the only sound he could remember clearly from a childhood otherwise lost to grief, the woman he had searched for in 50 cities across 3 continents, had finally been found, and now had vanished again. He poured himself a glass of water. He drank it slowly. He whispered, to the empty room, "Not this time, not again." Then he stood up, and he walked back into the great hall, and he announced to the assembled staff that the ball would continue as planned. He smiled at the cameras. He greeted the princesses. He danced with another 6 of them that afternoon. He told no one, because Diwan Huang had learned, in a hard, hard life, that when you are hunted by people who lie, the only way to win is to let them believe their lies are working. By the time Yeben descended for the second night of the ball, smiling, glowing, certain that her morning's work had succeeded, Diwan already knew. By midnight, Yoon Junho had found Ahuoma at a small inn in a southern town called Sunchan. By dawn, Diwan had on his desk a file 3 inches thick on B. Yeben's family, including the records of a small fortune in unexplained wire transfers from a shell company connected to a man named Park Dae-yoon. And by the end of the 3rd day of the ball, Diwan Huang understood every single thing that had been hidden from him for 23 years. He understood who Ahuoma's father had been. He understood why the Park family had cast her mother out. He understood how Yeben's grandmother had been connected to the betrayal. He understood that the fortune Adeabai had been denied was vast enough to threaten the entire balance of power among Korea's old families. And he understood that the woman he loved had walked away, alone, into a country that did not yet know how to see her, because she had been told a lie about him by a woman who wanted to wear his ring. He did not move against Yeben immediately. He waited. He smiled at her. He danced with her on the 4th night. He dined with her on the 5th. He let her believe she was winning. Because in the world he had been raised in, you do not strike at a snake until the snake has fully extended its neck. Meanwhile, in Sunchan, Ahuoma had found work in a small noodle shop run by a kind old man named Mr. Back, who asked no questions and paid her in cash, and let her sleep on a cot in the back room. She washed dishes. She wiped tables. She watched the rain come down through the small front window, and she tried not to think. But the dreams came anyway. Every night, she dreamed of a chandelier exploding. Every night, she dreamed of a boy with thick black hair whispering into her neck. Every night, she woke up gasping, with the old scars on her back aching as if they were fresh. On the 4th night, a man walked into the noodle shop. He was tall. He wore a plain gray suit. He sat down at the counter and ordered a bowl of beef broth. He did not look at her. He ate slowly. Mr. Back behind the counter was preparing the noodles when he glanced up and froze, because he had recognized the man's face from a magazine cover. He opened his mouth to speak. The man raised one finger, very slightly, and shook his head. Mr. Back closed his mouth. The man finished his broth. He left a $100 bill on the counter. He stood up. He walked toward the door. And then, with his hand on the handle, he turned back and said, very quietly, "Ahuoma." She had been wiping down a table at the back of the shop. She froze. She did not turn around. She could not. Her hands had gone numb. He spoke again. "I am not here to take you back. I am not here to ask you anything. I am here only to tell you one thing. The story she told you was a lie. The story she told you about me was a lie. Whatever else she said may be true. It may be false. We can decide together later. But the story she told you about me is a lie. I have been searching for you. I have been waiting for you. I have nothing to do with the people who hurt your mother. I never did. And when this is over, when the ball ends, when I have made the choice I am preparing to make, you will know which lie I am willing to tell the world to keep you safe. I am asking you to come home. Not to me. Not yet. Only to the house. Only to the room where Madame Sunya is weeping every hour. because she believes she has failed you. Come home for her, and for the woman your mother was, and for the girl you used to be. Decide tonight. I will send a car at midnight to the corner of the main road. If you are in it, I will know. If you are not, I will not search for you again. I am not capable of losing you twice, so choose, Ahuoma. Choose, please. He did not wait for an answer. He opened the door. He walked out into the rain. The bell above the door rang softly behind him, and Mr. Back, behind the counter, slowly began to chop onions, because he was a wise old man, and he knew that some moments are too sacred for a stranger's eyes. At midnight, in the cold November rain, a single black car pulled up to the corner of the main road in Sunchan. The driver waited for 10 minutes. He saw nothing. He prepared to drive away. And then, just as he was about to release the brake, a small figure stepped out of the shadows of a closed bakery across the street. She was carrying her small bag. Her braids were wet with rain. Her face was very calm. She walked to the car. She opened the door. She got in. She did not say a word. The driver did not turn around. He simply put the car into gear and drove. And 6 hours later, just before sunrise, the car passed through the front gates of the Hachwang estate, and Madame Sunya, who had been standing at the window all night, ran out into the courtyard barefoot and pulled Ahuoma into her arms before the car had even stopped, and the two of them stood there in the gray morning light, holding each other, weeping, while inside the great hall, the 7th and final night of the ball was being prepared. Now Ahuoma did not see D1 that day. He sent a message, through Madame Sunya, that she was to rest, that she was to eat, that she was to allow the household physician to examine her, and that she was not, under any circumstances, to come down to the great hall until he sent for her. She did, as he asked. She slept. She ate a bowl of seaweed soup that Madame Sunya brought her with trembling hands. She allowed the doctor to listen to her heart and check her pulse and frown over her thinness. And in the late afternoon, when the sun was beginning to slant red through the small window of the room above the garage, Madame Sunya came up the stairs with a long white box in her arms. She set the box on the bed. She opened it. Inside was a dress. It was not a gown. It was not designed by a famous house. It was a simple, beautifully made dress in a soft cream silk, with small embroidered flowers along the hem. Tiny mango blossoms intertwined with tiny camellias. Madame Sunya said quietly, "He had this made for you. He had it begun the day after he first saw you in the great hall, 3 months ago. He did not know if you would ever wear it, but he wanted it to exist. He said, child, that it was the closest thing he could imagine to a wedding dress for a woman who would never want one." Ahuoma stared at the dress. She touched the hem. She felt the embroidered blossoms. She closed her eyes. And she understood, finally, fully, completely, what Dawan Hachwang had been planning. She understood that the ball had not been a courtship. The ball had been a trap. The ball had been an offering, a public ritual designed to expose every greedy, dangerous, calculating snake that had been waiting in the corners of his life for him to be vulnerable. The ball had been the bait, and Ahuoma had not been the prize. She had been the witness. She had been the reason. She had been, all along, the only choice he had ever intended to make. She put on the dress. She let Madame Sunya braid her hair with small white flowers. She walked, in bare feet on cold marble, down the long hallway to the great hall. The orchestra was playing. 250 princesses were assembled in their finest gowns. 250 families were watching from the gallery. And on the dais at the front of the hall, Diwan Hachwang, in a simple black suit with a single white camellia on his lapel, was standing beside Bi Yeben, who had been told an hour earlier that she had been selected as his bride. Yeben was smiling. Yeben was glowing. Yeben had not yet seen who was walking through the door. The room went silent. 250 heads turned. Diwan's eyes found Ahuoma across the marble floor, and for one single breath, the most powerful man in Northeast Asia looked exactly like a frightened 9-year-old boy who had just seen a friend walk back into a room he had not believed she would ever enter again. Then he smiled. And he did something no chairman of any Korean conglomerate had ever done at a public engagement ball. He stepped down from the dais. He walked across the floor, past Bi Yeben, past the orchestra, past 249 princesses in dresses worth more than small houses, and he stopped in front of Ahuoma Adichie in her simple cream dress with mango blossoms on the hem, and he sank, very slowly, to one knee. The gasps that rose from the gallery were sharp enough to crack glass. He reached into his pocket. He produced not a ring, but a small piece of folded gray cotton, stained with old dried blood. He held it up to her. He said, in a voice that carried clearly to every corner of the great hall, 23 years ago in this room, on the marble floor beneath this chandelier, a little girl threw her body across mine and saved my life. I did not know her family name. I did not know her village. I did not know if I would ever see her again, but I made her a promise. I promised that I would find her, no matter how long it took. I have been searching for her in secret since I was 19 years old. Last year, I found her. She was working in my own house, having taken her mother's name to protect herself from the family who had wronged her. I arranged this gathering, this ball, this performance, because I knew that the people who had been hiding the truth from her for 23 years would come crawling out of the shadows the moment they sensed I was preparing to marry. I needed them visible. I needed them on record. I needed them to be foolish enough to threaten the woman I love, where my lawyers could hear them. They have been foolish. Tonight, by the end of this evening, the Park family will be facing 17 separate criminal charges. The B family will be facing 11. Their fortunes will be seized. Their names will be erased from every board they sit on. And the inheritance that was stolen from this woman's mother 23 years ago will be returned to her, in full, with interest, by a court order that was filed 18 hours ago and made public exactly 4 minutes ago. He paused. He looked up at her. His eyes were full. But none of that is why I am on this floor. I am on this floor because I am asking you, Ahuoma, Adichie, daughter of Adeabai and Junho, granddaughter of 2 grandmothers in 2 countries who deserve to see this day, to allow me, for the rest of my life, to be the small boy who walks behind you, holding your bag, asking your forgiveness for being too slow to find you. I am asking you to marry me, not because of the inheritance, not because of the scandal, not because of the ball, but because, 23 years ago, you whispered into my hair that I should breathe like the rain falling. I have been breathing like that ever since, and I would like, please, to breathe beside you for the rest of my life. The hall was silent. Ahuoma was crying. She was crying the way a person cries when something they had not known they were carrying is finally set down. She could not speak. She did not need to. She knelt down in front of him in her simple cream dress, and she took the piece of blood-stained cotton from his hand, and she pressed it against her own heart, and she nodded again, and she whispered, "Yes, D1, of course, yes. I have been breathing like rain for 23 years, too." The hall erupted. Madame Sunya, in the doorway, was weeping into her apron. B. Yeben had already been quietly escorted out the side door by 2 of D1's security officers. The orchestra, after a stunned silence, began to play a slow waltz, and D1 Hong stood up, and he lifted Ahuoma to her feet, and he walked her into the center of the great hall, and they began, slowly, to dance. The princesses, after a moment, began to applaud. Even those who had come hoping to leave with a ring understood, somewhere in their hearts, that they had just witnessed something larger than a competition. They had witnessed a man keep a promise made by a frightened boy. They had witnessed a woman walk out of poverty and silence into the place she had always belonged. They had witnessed, in a country famous for its old, hard rules, an act of love so plain and so public that the old rules had simply, quietly, given up. 6 months later, in a small ceremony attended only by Madame Sunya, by Mr. Back the noodle shop owner who had been given a new restaurant of his own as a quiet thank you, by Borum who served as the maid of honor, and by Yun Junho, the investigator who served as best man, Ahuoma and Diwan were married beneath a mango tree that had been flown in from Enugu and replanted in the garden of the Hwang estate. Adeabai's portrait stood beside the altar in a frame of polished cedar. Juno's photograph stood beside hers, and on Ahuoma's wrist, knotted in a thin gold chain Diwan had made for her, was the small piece of gray cotton that had once carried her childhood blood. It was the only jewelry she ever wore for the rest of her life. The Park family fortune, when it was finally returned to her, she gave away. All of it. She built schools in 3 Nigerian villages. She built a hospital in a small town outside Busan. She built a flower shop on the corner of the street in Wan where her mother had once washed dishes for $3 an hour, and she ran it herself on Saturday mornings, even after she became one of the most quietly powerful women in Northeast Asia. D1 ran the Hwang group with her advice in every major decision. They had 2 children, a boy they named June in honor of her father, a girl they named Adeabai in honor of her mother, And every year, on the anniversary of the night the chandelier had exploded, they walked together to the great hall, and they stood beneath the new chandelier, and Ahuoma would press her hand against the old scars on her back, and D1 would press his forehead against hers, and they would breathe together, slowly, the way rain falls. So if you have made it this far, you have walked with us through 23 years of waiting, through one impossible night of glass and gunfire, through one beautiful, defiant act of an 11-year-old girl who decided, without anyone teaching her, that some lives are worth saving. You have watched a maid become a queen, not by force, not by trickery, not by inheritance, but by being, simply and stubbornly, the same good person at every moment of her life that no one was watching. You have watched a billionaire keep a promise made by a child, and you have watched a room full of 250 princesses learn, in one evening, that the most powerful woman in the room is almost never the one in the most expensive dress. So before you go, do this one last thing for me. If this story moved you, even a little, even in the smallest place inside your chest, hit that subscribe button right now, hit the like, tap the bell so that the next time we sit down to tell each other a story, you will be the first to know. And in the comments, tell me one final thing. Tell me, in one sentence, what promise you would keep for 23 years if you had to. Whose hand would you wait for? Whose face would you search for in 50 cities? We will read every single one of them, and we will remember, together, that the best stories are not invented. They are kept. They are kept the way Ahuoma kept hers, with quiet hands and a steady heart, until the day the world finally turned around and saw her. Until next time, friends, walk well, love loudly, and breathe, always, like the rain falling.